I still remember the weight of the sapphire ring on my finger the first night I wore it. Not just the physical weight, though it was heavy enough to be real, but the weight of promise, the kind you feel in your chest when your whole future seems to have finally agreed to show up. My name is Eleanor. I'm the woman who thought she had it all figured out, the one who meticulously plans every detail down to the font size. I was 31, a graphic designer specializing in high-end, vintage posters, and I had waited years for that small metal circle to say what my heart had been whispering since the day I met Nathaniel, Nate Miller. We would be together. We would build something. We would keep each other. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Nate went down on one knee in my tiny, sun-drenched Chicago kitchen, my coffee maker hissing on the counter like an impatient guest. He said a million things, and none of them mattered as much as the one that landed last. "Will you marry me?" I said yes in a messy voice, and he laughed. And for a few minutes the world tightened into that sound until everything else blurred. I floated for a week. I planned an engagement party the way people plan weddings. Only smaller, only for the people who mattered. I wanted one night where everyone would see me shining, where the world would have to agree that I had chosen someone good and true. The party was a movie. The apartment smelled like wine and aged cheddar. My friend Sierra ran the playlist and danced with the waiter between courses. Chloe, Nate's college roommate's wife, who always wore her hair in that bright, chaotic blonde style, hugged me like she might squeeze me into pieces. Glasses clinked, and someone told the same joke 3 times, and we laughed 3 times like it was the first. People said the right things. Nate shook hands and kissed cheeks and made a show of being proud of me. I was careful not to look at the clock, clinging to the moment. Then, I'm the kind of person who notices faces, especially faces that look almost like someone else. When I first saw her, she was a shadow at the edge of a loud conversation, laughing at something I couldn't hear. But then her eyes found mine, and I felt a sudden, sickening flip in my stomach, the kind you get when you nearly collide with a memory you thought was buried. Except I had never known her. It only took 3 seconds for the recognition to settle into my bones. She could have been a twin of Nate's former fiancé. Same high cheekbones, same stubborn, almost cruel mouth. For a stupid second, I wondered if the champagne and the sheer joy of the evening had made my brain create a phantom. I felt a cold dread settle in my fingertips. I moved toward her like a woman moving through thick water toward a single, damning phrase she's desperate to catch. I walked, smiling, practicing small talk in my head. She didn't look surprised when she met me. She looked curious, distracted. Her eyes kept slipping down to the sapphire ring on my hand, then back to my face, as if the jewel and I were the only 2 things we were studying in the room, 2 sides of a difficult equation. Then, without a single word of explanation or greeting, she gave me a look of profound, unsettling pity, and turned, walking away into the crowd. That night, Nate didn't come back. The house emptied. People hugged, said effusive goodbyes, and left like a tide pulling away from the shore, taking all the noise with them. I stood at the sink, rinsing a champagne flute, and felt the silence settle, like a blanket I hadn't asked for, heavy and suffocating. I called Nate's phone. It went straight to voicemail, the same recorded message I teased him about for months. I called again, the sound of the dial tone now a raw, accusatory beep. Voicemail. I texted. I saw the 3 gray dots of the red receipt appear and then vanish. No response. I told myself he'd turn up at some point, that he was playing a ridiculous joke, that this was the kind of man who loved a late, dramatic entrance. It was ridiculous how fiercely I held on to that small, desperate flicker of faith, refusing to let the cold dread win. When I finally found him the next morning, sprawled on the couch in the suit he had worn to greet our loved ones, it felt unbearably cruel. He smelled of something sharp and chemical, and a perfume that wasn't mine. His face was blank in a way that made my hands buzz with a terrifying heat, a prelude to a scream I couldn't yet afford to make. I set my messenger bag down on the floor and left the room without touching him, without speaking. I left without making a scene, not a single sound. I packed my patience into a small, tight knot and went to my job like an actor continuing a show during an earthquake, pretending the foundation wasn't shaking. This is the terrible thing about love and the way it lies to you. You keep telling yourself, this is just a bump in the road. This is just a tired man. This is just a late-night mistake that will smell like embarrassment and shame in the morning. You ignore the parts that are terribly, fundamentally wrong, because the beautiful idea in your head, the life you had meticulously mapped out, the house, the children, the quiet Sundays, is too bright and vital to let go. You become a master of self-deception, editing out the harsh reality in favor of the comfortable fiction. The chest of letters was not supposed to be found by me. It belonged under his nightstand, in the bottom drawer, the place you put things you don't want to look at, but can't quite discard or destroy. I was cleaning up the bedroom, the kind of small, compulsive ritual you do to feel like you're putting your life back in order when the world is spiraling. When my fingers brushed the edge of a small, carved wooden box, I pulled it out because the house felt full of secrets, and I was suddenly greedy, desperate for any kind of answer, no matter how painful. The truth had become my only currency. There were photos inside the wooden box, a small, elegant bottle of perfume that smelled like money, and long afternoons and someone else's delicate skin. There were letters with dates in a handwriting I knew was not mine, elegant and sprawling. Some of them were written days before our engagement, some shockingly, sickeningly, after. In the photographs, he was smiling at her with a softness, a sheer, unburdened joy I had thought was reserved only for me. In one, he offers her something in his open hand, a gesture of profound intimacy, and in another, the woman's finger glitters with a heavy stone, the sapphire ring, that same exact piece of jewelry I now wore, the one I had mistaken for a symbol of my future. I remember the world going very loud and very slow at the same time. Sound became distant, muffled. The air in my lungs tasted strangely like metal, like pennies. I dropped the picture, and it fluttered like a cheap, insignificant leaflet to the wooden floor. The reality was a furious, clawing animal in my chest, a beast that demanded I move, that I respond with a violence equal to the offense. I wanted to throw every breakable thing in the house, to scream until my throat was raw, to make him feel the same terrifying, stomach-lurching shame and upending that had just demolished me. Instead, I folded myself into a patient, terrifying silence the way you fold fine, expensive china, carefully, slowly, so not even the hairline cracks would be visible to the naked eye. The tension was exquisite. That night we argued until the neighbors must have thought the apocalypse had finally begun in our quiet brownstone flat. The words were not simply arguments. They were shards of glass, meant to cut. He told me, his voice rough with manufactured defensiveness, that I was being ridiculously dramatic, that I was jealous for absolutely no reason, that the box was a sentimental relic. I told him the precise truth I had found under his drawer, listing the dates of the letters that were post-engagement. He laughed, a short, sharp sound like a man clearing his throat, and then said the most terrible, annihilating thing a person could say to you when you are sincere and raw and bleeding. I never even wanted you in the first place. I just wanted the peace you promised. I left a few hours later with a small duffel bag and a fury as cold and quiet as a snowfall, deadly in its absolute lack of heat. I stayed with Sierra, who fed me black coffee and didn't ask me to narrate the raw, grinding pain she already understood perfectly. For a few days, Nate and I hovered like distant satellites, near enough to feel the gravity of the other's absence, far enough not to be drawn back into the lethal orbit. I desperately wanted him to call. I wanted him to crawl to Sierra's door and beg for the lie to be put back together. Instead, I learned the dark art of watching him from afar, of waiting. Chloe came to my office that week, during a slow afternoon. Her face was solemn, drawn in a way that made her always cheerful blonde hair look foreign, a distraction from the genuine sadness in her eyes. "Are you okay, truly?" she asked. Like that's a simple, easy yes or no question with a quick answer. I lied and told her we were fine, just taking a break. She sat down anyway, settling in for a long, unavoidable conversation. I learned more from her than I wanted to about that other life, the one I hadn't been invited into, but had been living parallel to. Nate and his ex, Victoria, a charismatic 33-year-old marketing executive, quick to smile and quicker to vanish, had apparently been secretly seeing each other again. They'd been doing it in quiet, almost audacious plain sight. They'd been meeting in the dark corners of sophisticated downtown cafes, in the anonymous back seats of expensive taxis, in the soft, alluring glow of a city that likes to keep expensive secrets for a price. Chloe described Victoria with a kind of pitying, terrified admiration that made me feel both infinitesimally small and suddenly dangerously powerful. "She's magnetic, you know?" Chloe sighed. "People just fall into her orbit even when they absolutely don't mean to." My jealousy solidified, turning from a burning sensation into a sharp, useful tool. Jealousy is a funny, transformative thing. At first, it makes your hands itch with selfish, petty ideas. You want to ruin their car, slash their clothes, shout their secrets. At second, when you control it, it becomes a powerful, strategic tool. I began to dig, not purely because I wanted to hurt, though I did with a cold, clear precision, but because I wanted the exact, undeniable shape of the whole truth. I needed to map the boundaries of his deception. The cleaning lady in my old building was a woman named Carla, who worked 3 high-end apartments in our complex. She had a quick, barking laugh and a slow, almost reluctant hand with the mop. For a small, discreet price and a bigger, more genuine smile, Carla told me about a spare, untraceable phone Victoria kept hidden in her coat pocket like a secret lover, a Burmer for her indiscretions. I bribed Carla to borrow the phone for an afternoon. I took it sitting alone in a park, and I saw exactly what I wanted. A carousel of faces, messages that read like a man's guilty daily diary, precise dates, compromising places. And then, like a deeply ugly, unsettling jewel, evidence that Victoria had been unfaithful and strategically opportunistic even while she was with Nate. Unsettling, but not enough to heal the raw memory of what I'd found in the wooden chest. That night, I slid a note into Victoria's coat pocket where the spare phone usually lived. The note had a number, the simple pin to a private, off-the-books account I knew about because of the casual, boastful way Nate bragged about investments when he thought I wasn't truly listening. The note said, "Plain as pure cruelty. Have it. Spend it all." I wanted to see what she would choose to do when presented with a dangerous opportunity. Period. 2 weeks after I left the note for Victoria, the wedding invitations went out. I sat on my small, iron balcony the morning the invitation email landed in my inbox. A simple, elegant PDF, with a classic font the bride had likely chosen from an expensive, curated wedding blog. I stared at the date as if it were a foreign, unbelievable word. It said, in black type that refused to carry any shame or irony, Saturday, August 15th. The wedding was to be held at the prestigious Parkview Estate, RSVP by July 30th. It was a formal, undeniable declaration of the future that was supposed to have been mine. There are moments where your life splits, a clean fissure, and you can pretend both paths are momentarily real. This was one of those moments, an inflection point. I put on my professional face like a necessary piece of armor, and did what everyone expected. I RSVP'd, not as a villain, not as a spy, but as a civil, dignified person who would attend the event and hold her tongue in the back row, a quiet spectator. My attendance was my declaration of war. I wanted to see the look on Nate's face, not when he saw me, but when she didn't show up to the altar. I wanted to watch the betrayal I orchestrated unfold with perfect, cold symmetry. When the day came, I dressed the way you dress when you plan to be noticed without appearing to try too hard. A simple, slate-gray dress, my dark hair loose and sleek, heels that clicked on the marble like little controlled threats. The hall was a perfect piece of ritual. Lilies and white roses in soft blushes. A massive arch that promised eternity. Guests hovering like polite, well-dressed moths to the flame of an important event. I sat deliberately near the back, my presence unspectacular and unobtrusive. Nate stood at the front, his hands slightly shaking, his face chalk white under the bright lights, a nervous smile plastered on. He smiled awkwardly at people. He even smiled directly at me, a brief, terrified acknowledgement, as if he were daring himself to believe he was brave enough to go through with this. Time is slippery and cruel at weddings. Minutes stretch into the size of years when the person everyone expects to walk down the aisle does not appear. People started whispering in groups, knots of discomfort and rising panic forming in the rows like storm clouds gathering. The best man nervously muttered and checked his watch for the 10th time. The organist, perhaps sensing the catastrophic delay, played the wrong sort of piece, a soft, uncertain, Baroque melody that made everyone wonder if the intended soundtrack for lifelong commitment had been misplaced or forgotten. As an hour bled into an interminable, agonizing hour, you could see the sheer public humiliation bloom like a vivid, ugly bruise on Nate's face. He kept turning to the grand doors as if the bride might finally enter and apologize for her lateness like a simple drama queen. The crowd thinned out slowly as some guests left, their patience and their hopes both utterly exhausted by the spectacle. For the core group who stayed, phones were out, and cameras hummed like small, hungry recording bees. My silence was a weapon. When his eyes finally found mine across the widening, emptying room, we exchanged a different kind of conversation entirely, a silent, powerful reckoning. I did not get up. I did not walk out. I sat very still, a quiet, immovable island in a tide of gawking spectators. He mouthed a silent question, his face twisted in desperate confusion, a plea. I mouthed a single, crisp reply that only I could hear. I tried. The memory of the ring and the chest was my armor. At the very end of the scheduled ceremony time, when Nate was still standing stiffly at the altar with a strained smile that looked like it had teeth missing, people finally left in a mix of uncomfortable sympathy and cold, voyeuristic curiosity. I waited for my chance to be something other than an audience member in my own life's tragedy. I wanted to talk to him in the field where things are honest and raw. Instead, as the hall emptied, a tall woman with a reporter's curiosity and a husband who liked high-stakes gossip slipped into the doorway like destiny itself. "You did the right thing," the gossiping woman said to me, her voice deliberately loud enough for a few of the remaining lingering people to overhear the indictment. "Let him stand there and be embarrassed. Let him think he's got something that he clearly doesn't deserve." Her words landed in the silence with a sharp sound like a closing door. I felt a terrifying, crystalline calmness wash over me. I drank the cold stillness like one might drink a bitter, exquisite wine, savoring the subtle burn. The humiliation was perfect. That night, I walked home from the estate with a strange, hollow space under my ribs, a vacuum of emotion. Nate texted me once, a short, desperate string of apologies I would never want to read. I didn't respond. I spent the entire night on the thin sofa of my rented flat, wide awake and building intricate plans like complex Lego towers, stacking betrayal upon betrayal. Revenge, when it first blooms, is unobtrusive. It is a powerful, addictive seed that sits under your tongue and tastes exactly like power and earned authority. I had only meant to teach him a painful lesson, I hadn't fully considered the way lessons become lasting public edicts. I hadn't considered how a controlled game could spiral wildly out of the player's hands and take on a life of its own. I watched as Victoria and Nate staged public appearances that came off as contrived and thin, like cheap, peeling wallpaper. I saw their posed photos online, caught by mutual friends who thought they were doing something helpful by tagging Nate in the frame. I read the brutal comments. People made cruel assumptions, offered scathing opinions, and we all pretended we were surprised when life turned exactly how life often turns, when no one is watching too closely. That's it. Then Sierra texted me a photo of an old article she'd found while scanning public records for me. A throwaway, dusty piece about my mother and a small scandal years ago. A crucial name that had been missing from my family's story. In the grainy picture, my mother looked younger and defiantly beautiful, the kind of defiance that had been a silent family trait I had inherited. The article had been about a tumultuous property sale, a stormy division of inheritance, and someone named Raymond. He was listed as a brother in the paper in a way that suggested close proximity, but I had never ever heard of him. Family secrets are like small, forgotten rooms with doors that have been painstakingly nailed shut and painted over. You can hear the faint sound of someone moving in there sometimes, a whisper of activity, but you never, ever knock. I found myself knocking with a sudden urgency. I started asking questions the way a woman follows a sharp scent, delicate at first, then more urgent and demanding. I went to the registry office for official records. I called a distant cousin I barely spoke to. I sat at the kitchen table with my mother that Sunday and watched her carefully spoon sugar into a cup, as if she could precisely measure the right moment to hurt me less with the truth. "You were young," she said finally, her voice flat and dull. "It was messy, deeply shameful. I thought I did the best I could to protect you." "Who is Raymond?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why have I never heard of him?" She looked only at the polished wood floor. The silence afterwards was a vast empty room, wide enough to build an entire life inside. "He left," she whispered, "before you were born, before I could make things right." The revelation of a hidden family history did something odd to my sense of self. It didn't explain Nate's betrayal. It didn't explain the hateful letters or the ring. But it added a heavy layer of old, generational ache that made the revenge I was orchestrating feel much smaller at the edges and terrifyingly sharper in the center. I began to wonder what other doors were closed in my life, and why. Back in my current life, loose ends began to knot themselves into something much more dangerous and intricate. Victoria's old phone returned to Carla's possession, with no note of where it had been. Carla said she had found it mysteriously tucked behind a heavy curtain at Victoria's mother's house. I had a strong feeling, a small, prickling, certain certainty, that I had started a chain reaction, a momentum I could not possibly stop. People had parts to play in my game, and they were acting them out now, as if they'd been secretly rehearsing the roles all their lives. And Nate. He was changing too, but subtly. Not in the dramatic way of a repentant, begging figure, but in the smaller ways that indicate deep entropy. A message left unread for too long. A promise dissolved because it was mildly inconvenient. He started spending late nights at friends' houses, calling in with flimsy excuses about demanding work and urgent obligations. Once a man stops thoroughly explaining himself, you can hear the distance grow between you two, loud and clear, like quiet, distant thunder. At a small, dimly lit bar one night, Nate finally found me. He sat down opposite me, as if nothing catastrophic had happened between us. He ordered a bourbon and then asked me something that should have been simple, something honest. "Are you happy?" 1,000 chaotic, furious answers crowded my mouth, a riot of emotion. Instead, I told him I'd been busy with work. "Why did you do it?" he asked suddenly, his voice soft, almost wounded. "Why did you go to the wedding? Why did you want to publicly humiliate me like that?" The question was gentle, and for a baffling second, it sounded almost like genuine remorse. I thought of the hate-filled letters and the scent of the foreign perfume. I thought of him passed out on the couch. Instead of answering his plea, I asked him a question that cut very close to the bone. "Who is Victoria to you, truly?" His eyes hardened instantly. "She is someone who fits into a place I thought was permanently missing inside me," he said, his voice now defensive. "I honestly don't know how to explain a thing that feels so private, so internal." Secrets grow heavy and toxic when they are privy only to themselves. You learn to carry them like dangerous contraband. When people talk about betrayal, they often think of the dramatic gestures, the hotel key left on a pillow, the lipstick smear on a collar. But betrayal is also the small, steady erosion that happens when essential parts of someone's truth are systematically withheld. It eats the baseboards of a relationship until the floor finally inevitably collapses. Evelyn's role dissolved like sugar in warm tea. Raymond retreated into the night, a man who had apologized for his past and then persisted in his manipulation. The ledger made its way around enough hands that people in positions of financial responsibility had to look into it. Names were redacted. People made their private arrangements. Life, in its cruel, relentless way, rearranged itself into something that fit the new, uncomfortable facts. The conclusion was not cinematic. There were no celebratory reunions. The revenge I'd wanted had been delivered in awkward headlines and private meetings that made powerful people shuffle papers and mutter nervously. Nate is gone from my life now in a way that feels permanent and thin. The way a menu on a restaurant table might mention a dish you once loved that is no longer served. My mother and Raymond met again, this time not as passionate lovers, but as two people who had long ago been part of someone else's defining story. They talked with an honesty that felt like new furniture in a house that had been ransacked. She told him, quietly, that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting the damage. He said he understood, which may have been true or may have been the smallest, kindest lie in the world. I found myself sitting in the quiet of my kitchen many nights, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own thoughts unfold like clean laundry. I had wanted to be fierce and made them answer, and I did. I had wanted humiliation and a public spectacle. I had wanted a sense of justice, a balancing of the cosmic scales. What I wanted, as it terribly turned out, was simply peace. And peace is not found in treaties forced onto other people through public pressure. It is found in the small, vital agreements you make with yourself, the hard-won acceptance of reality. There are things I will always irrevocably carry: the sharp sting of the ultimate betrayal, the terrible knowledge that the man I had married in my hopeful head had been a vastly different person than the one on my couch, the chilling picture of Victoria's hand with my ring, the financial ledger. I have learned that people are not just simply good or bad. They are complex intersections of desperate choice and deep-seated fear. You can rage at them, and sometimes you absolutely should. But you also have to live with the consequences of their actions. And the truth is that living well is infinitely harder than punishing. I don't know if Nate will ever find his way back to honesty on his own. I don't know if Victoria will ever forgive herself for her opportunism. I don't know if Raymond meant any of the apologies he finally made. What I know is this: I survived an unmaking. I was the woman who found the secret, who nudged a few crucial dominoes, who watched as the room emptied and the silence finally returned. I am the daughter of a woman who did what she had to do to survive. I am the woman who learned how to stand firmly against a life someone else tried to script for her. On a small, otherwise empty shelf in my flat, There's the wooden box I uncovered from his drawer and kept. I have not opened it since the devastating day I found it. Sometimes I look at it like a dangerous relic, and sometimes like a quiet challenge to my resolve. My hands still itch to break it open, to compulsively count the letters and name every single betrayal. But I have learned to let things sit exactly where they are, to allow them to be mere evidence and not instruction for my future. The ring is gone. The man who put it on my finger is gone, erased. The hole he left in me is a scar that pulses sometimes, an old ache when I least expect it. And then there are days when I laugh at a small, ridiculous thing, a bad joke from Sierra, a ridiculous coincidence, and the world seems repairable again, full of possibility. The revenge tasted sharp and good for a single night, a powerful rush, but it didn't make the house feel like a comforting home. Home, I'm learning, is built from the slow, deliberate work of choosing people who do not belong anywhere in your emotional ledger. People who are honest. I am finally beginning the long, quiet process of choosing myself. Click on the next story waiting for you on screen. Because trust me, the betrayals only get darker from here.